In the summer of 2025, freelance journalist Daniel Mercer was driving through western Kentucky to write a story about disappearing rural communities. According to his GPS, the route should have taken less than 3 hours. Instead, he arrived in a place called Asher County. The strange part wasn't that he had never heard of it. The strange part was that nobody else had either. The county appeared on road signs. It appeared on local maps. It had a courthouse, a gas station, a diner, and nearly 3,000 residents. Everything about it looked real. Everything about it felt real. Yet when Daniel tried to call anyone outside the county, the calls failed. When he searched for Asher County online, nothing appeared. No records, no history. No mention of it anywhere. At first, Daniel assumes it is some kind of mapping error. Then people begin talking about days that never happened. A waitress remembers a Thursday that nobody else recalls. An elderly man insists Christmas arrived twice in the same year. Children draw calendars containing dates that do not exist. And every midnight a church bell rings somewhere beyond the hills. The residents lock their doors before the final bell. Nobody will explain why. The longer Daniel stays, the more disturbing things become. Entire conversations vanish from memory. Photographs change overnight. People wake up remembering different lives. And hidden throughout the county are references to days that seem to have been erased from reality itself. Soon, Daniel discovers an impossible truth. Asher County is not missing from the world. The world is missing pieces of itself because of Asher County. Now the county has noticed him, and every day he remains there, another piece of his life disappears. A chilling horror novel filled with supernatural suspense, reality distortion, false memories, impossible phenomena, and a mystery so unsettling that even after the story ends, you may find yourself wondering whether you have forgotten something important. Chapter 1. The County on No Map. The rain started shortly after sunset. By 9 o'clock, Daniel Mercer could barely see the road ahead. The windshield wipers swept across the glass as thunder rolled somewhere in the darkness. Daniel had spent the last week traveling across rural Kentucky, collecting stories about small communities that were slowly disappearing. Now he was exhausted. All he wanted was a motel room and a few hours of sleep. According to his GPS, he was less than an hour away. That was before he saw the sign. A flash of lightning illuminated the highway. For a split second, Daniel saw a weathered sign standing beside the road. He eased off the gas. The sign read, "Welcome to Asher County Population, 2,841. Daniel frowned. He had never heard of Asher County. That alone wasn't strange. America was full of places most people had never heard of. What bothered him was that the county didn't appear on his GPS. Daniel glanced down at the screen. Nothing. No county marker, no county name. Just a stretch of road passing through empty terrain. That's odd. Daniel continued driving. The sign disappeared behind him. A minute later, something even stranger happened. The storm stopped. Instantly. Not gradually, not naturally. One moment rain hammered the car. The next moment the windshield was dry. Daniel blinked. The sky ahead was clear. Stars glittered overhead. But when Daniel looked in the rearview mirror, his stomach tightened. The storm was still there, behind him. A wall of rain stretched across the highway. Lightning flashed inside it. The dividing line between the storm and the clear sky looked unnaturally sharp, almost like a boundary. Daniel slowed down. What the hell am I looking at? No answer came. Only silence. Daniel gripped the steering wheel and kept driving. 15 minutes later, he reached the town center. The place looked normal enough. Small shops, a diner, a church, a gas station, a courthouse. Everything appeared ordinary, yet something felt wrong. The streets were empty, not deserted, just empty. Lights glowed inside homes and businesses. People were clearly here. Nobody was outside. Daniel parked beside a gas station. The glowing sign outside buzzed softly. He stepped out of the car and walked inside. A small bell chimed above the entrance. Behind the counter stood an elderly woman. She looked up and smiled. "Wet night?" the woman asked. Daniel nodded. "It was until about 10 minutes ago." The woman's smile faded. "You came through the storm." Daniel laughed. "I didn't fly over it." The woman didn't laugh. For a moment she looked genuinely concerned. Daniel grabbed a bottle of water from a cooler. Then he approached the counter. The woman scanned the bottle. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "I'm trying to get to Pine Hollow." The woman stared at him. "Pine Hollow?" "Yeah." Daniel nodded. "I have a motel reservation there." The woman slowly shook her head. "I've never heard of it." Daniel smiled. "It can't be far from here." The woman continued staring. "No." The woman swallowed nervously. I've never heard of it." Daniel felt a chill. The woman wasn't joking. She looked genuinely confused. Then she asked a question. A very strange question. "What year is it?" Daniel blinked. "What? What year is it?" The woman repeated. 2025. The woman's expression immediately changed. Relief washed across her face. "Oh." Daniel frowned. "What does that mean?" The woman looked toward the window, then back at Daniel. "You should find a place to stay before midnight." "Why?" The woman hesitated. "You don't want to be outside when the bells start." Daniel laughed. "The bells?" The woman didn't answer. Daniel left the gas station feeling more unsettled than before. The town appeared perfectly ordinary, yet every interaction felt slightly off, like everyone knew something he didn't. He walked toward the courthouse. That's when he noticed the calendars. One hung inside a diner, another inside a pharmacy, another inside a barber shop. Every calendar displayed the same date, October 14th. No year, just October 14th. Daniel stopped walking. A fourth calendar showed October 14th, then a fifth, then a sixth. Every calendar in town showed exactly the same day. No exceptions. Daniel pulled out his phone and snapped a photograph. The image saved normally. At least that seemed normal. A church bell rang. The sound echoed across town. Daniel checked the time. 10:58 p.m. The bell rang again. Several house lights immediately switched off. Daniel looked around. Another bell rang. More lights disappeared. The pattern repeated. Bell, darkness, bell, darkness, bell, darkness. As though the entire town followed an invisible curfew. Daniel watched from the courthouse steps. Nobody appeared concerned. Nobody seemed surprised. Whatever was happening, the residents expected it. The fifth bell echoed through the night. Daniel looked toward the church. Its front door stood open. Darkness filled the entrance. For a brief moment, Daniel thought he saw someone standing inside. A tall silhouette, completely motionless. Watching him, Daniel narrowed his eyes. The figure vanished. The doorway was empty again. A chill crept down his spine. The sixth bell rang. A dog barked somewhere nearby, then another, then another. Suddenly all the barking stopped at once. The silence felt unnatural, heavy, waiting. Daniel turned around. A woman stood across the street. He was certain she hadn't been there a moment ago. The woman looked frightened. very frightened. "Who are you?" Daniel called. The woman ignored the question. Instead, she spoke softly. "You're not from here." Daniel nodded. "No." The woman took a step backward. "You shouldn't be outside after the 7th bell." Daniel frowned. "What happens after the 7th bell?" The woman's face turned pale. Before Daniel could ask another question, she hurried away. Within seconds, she disappeared into the darkness. The 7th bell began to ring. The deep sound rolled across Asher County. Daniel looked around. Every remaining light in town instantly switched off. Homes, stores, streetlights, businesses, all of them. Darkness swallowed the county, complete darkness. Daniel stood frozen. His heart hammered inside his chest. Then something moved across the courthouse lawn. A shape. Tall, thin, impossible to see clearly. It crossed the grass in complete silence. Daniel raised his phone flashlight. The beam illuminated nothing. The lawn was empty. But a second later, his phone vibrated. A notification appeared on the screen. Daniel's blood ran cold. The message contained only 4 words. "Welcome back, Daniel." He stared at the screen. One question immediately entered his mind. He had never been to Asher County before. So why did the message say, "Welcome back"? Chapter 2. The 8th Bell. Daniel Mercer stared at the message glowing on his phone screen. "Welcome back, Daniel." His pulse pounded in his ears. The message had arrived from an unknown number. No area code, no contact information. Just 4 words. Daniel quickly typed a reply. "Who is this?" He pressed send. The message failed immediately. No signal, no service, nothing. Yet somehow someone had sent a message to him. A cold knot formed in his stomach. The courthouse lawn remained empty. The strange figure he had seen moments earlier was gone. Or perhaps it had never been there. Daniel wasn't sure anymore. The town square sat in complete darkness. No streetlights, no headlights, no voices. The silence felt unnatural, like the entire county was holding its breath. Daniel looked toward the church. The open doors were still visible in the darkness. He considered walking over. Every instinct told him not to. Then another sound echoed across town. A bell. Daniel froze. The 7th bell had already rung. He was sure of it. Yet this was another bell. A slower bell, a deeper bell, one he hadn't heard before. The sound seemed to come from somewhere beyond the town, far away, hidden among the hills. Dong. The noise vibrated through the ground beneath his feet. Daniel checked his phone. 11 p.m. The 8th bell rang. Every house in town immediately locked its doors. Daniel heard it happen. Hundreds of deadbolts sliding into place at the exact same moment. Click, 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 click. The sound spread through the darkness like a wave. Daniel stood completely still. Nobody had warned him about an 8th bell. The woman had only mentioned the 7th. Then something moved. A curtain shifted inside a nearby house. A face appeared briefly behind the glass. An elderly man. Terrified. The man pointed toward Daniel, then pointed toward the church, before quickly closing the curtain. Daniel frowned. "What are you trying to tell me?" No answer came. Only silence. Then the bell rang again. Dong. This time the church doors slammed shut. The sound echoed across town. Daniel jumped. His heart raced. The church had been opened seconds earlier. Now it was sealed. Something about that bothered him more than it should have. Then he noticed movement. Not at ground level. Above him. Daniel slowly looked up. The courthouse clock tower stood against the night sky, and someone was standing inside it. A silhouette, perfectly still, watching him. Daniel took a step backward. The figure didn't move. Lightning flashed in the distance. For a fraction of a second, the tower became visible. The figure vanished. The tower was empty. Daniel exhaled slowly. Okay. His voice sounded much smaller than he intended. Okay, I need answers. The only building still illuminated was the diner. Its neon sign glowed faintly across the square. Daniel headed toward it. The closer he got, the stranger things felt. The air seemed heavier, thicker, almost difficult to breathe. When he reached the diner, he pulled the door open. The bell above the entrance chimed softly. Inside sat 7 people. Every one of them turned to look at him. Nobody spoke. Nobody smiled. Nobody looked surprised, as if they had been expecting him. A woman behind the counter broke the silence. The waitress looked to be around 40. Dark hair, tired eyes. Her name tag read, Molly Reed. "You're still outside," Molly said. Daniel nodded. "I guess I am." Molly looked uncomfortable. "You shouldn't be." Daniel approached the counter. "Can somebody tell me what's going on?" No one answered. Several customers stared down into their coffee cups. Others avoided eye contact completely. Daniel felt frustration building. "Look!" Daniel glanced around the room. "I'm not from here." Everyone immediately looked at him. The reaction was strange, almost fearful. Finally, an older man spoke. His voice sounded shaky. "My name is Walter Briggs." The man swallowed hard. "You are from here?" Daniel stared. "No." Walter shook his head. "Not originally." "What does that mean?" Walter looked toward the window. "The county doesn't bring people here." Daniel waited. Walter continued. "The county brings people back." A chill ran through Daniel's body. Before he could ask another question, a loud crash came from the kitchen. Several customers jumped. Molly hurried toward the back. A few seconds later, she returned. Her face had gone pale, very pale. "Molly?" Daniel asked. Molly didn't answer. She simply pointed toward a calendar hanging on the wall. Everyone in the diner turned to look. Daniel followed their gaze. His stomach dropped. The date had changed. When he entered, it displayed October 14th. Now it displayed October 15th. The change had happened in seconds. Nobody had touched it. Nobody had approached it. The page had simply changed. One moment October 14th, the next moment October 15th. Daniel felt the room spinning. Did anybody see that? No one answered, because judging by their faces, everyone had. Walter slowly stood. His chair scraped across the floor. "You should leave town." Daniel laughed nervously. "Trust me, that's exactly what I plan to do." Walter shook his head. "No." His expression darkened. "I mean now." Daniel frowned. "What happens on October 15th? Nobody spoke. The silence lasted several seconds. Finally, Molly answered. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "People start remembering." Daniel stared. "Remembering what?" Molly looked directly into his eyes. "The days they lost." A loud scraping noise suddenly echoed from outside. Everyone in the diner flinched. The sound continued. Metal dragging across pavement, slowly, deliberately. Closer, closer, closer. Daniel turned toward the window. The street outside was empty, yet the scraping continued. A customer quietly began crying. Another buried his face in his hands. Nobody wanted to look outside. Nobody except Daniel. The journalist inside him refused to ignore it. He stepped toward the window. Molly immediately grabbed his arm. "Daniel," her voice trembled. "Don't." Daniel looked at her. "Why?" Molly's eyes filled with fear. "Because if you see who's making the sound..." She paused. "It sees you too." The scraping stopped. Instantly, The silence that followed felt worse. Daniel slowly looked through the window. Nothing. Empty street, empty sidewalks, no movement, no source for the noise. He exhaled. Then something appeared. A figure stood at the far end of the road. Tall, thin, motionless. Daniel couldn't make out details. The distance was too great. Yet he knew one thing immediately. The figure was staring directly at the diner. Directly at him. A few seconds passed. Then the figure took a step forward. Every light inside the diner flickered. The customers gasped. The figure took another step. The lights flickered again. Then another step. Another flicker. Daniel's pulse hammered. Something was horribly wrong. The figure wasn't walking toward the diner. The figure was walking toward him. And with every step it took, the date on the calendar behind the counter changed again. October 15th, October 16th, October 17th, October 18th. One day disappearing with every step. One day being erased. And when Daniel looked back toward the road, the figure was suddenly standing directly outside the window, smiling, and it had his face. Chapter 3. The Days People Forget. Daniel Mercer stumbled backward. The figure outside the diner window didn't move. It simply stood there, smiling. Its face was identical to his. The same dark hair, the same tired eyes, even the small scar above his left eyebrow. It was as if Daniel were staring into a mirror, except the reflection was standing outside, and Daniel was inside. Every person inside the diner lowered their heads. Nobody wanted to look at the figure, not even Molly Reed. Walter Briggs quietly whispered, "Don't let it know you're afraid." Daniel looked at Walter. "What is that?" Walter didn't answer. Instead, he slowly closed the window blinds. The figure disappeared behind them. The scraping sound returned, slowly moving away. Everyone in the diner remained silent until the sound finally faded into the distance. Only then did someone breathe again. Daniel looked around the room. What was that? Molly swallowed. "We don't give it a name." Daniel frowned. "Why?" Molly answered quietly. "Because names make things easier to remember." Walter added, "And remembering is dangerous here." Daniel stared at both of them. "None of this makes any sense." Walter nodded. "It won't. Not tonight." Molly placed a cup of hot coffee in front of Daniel. "You should stay inside until sunrise." Daniel shook his head. "I need to leave." "You can't." "I have a car." Walter sighed. So did everyone else. Daniel stood. "I'm serious." Molly looked at him with genuine sympathy. "So are we." Daniel walked outside despite their warnings. The square remained empty. His SUV was still parked across the street, exactly where he had left it. Relieved, he hurried toward it. He unlocked the door, started the engine. The dashboard lit up, fuel tank full. Everything looked normal. Daniel shifted into drive. The SUV rolled forward. He reached the end of the street, made a right turn, another right, another. 5 minutes later, he was back in front of the diner. Daniel frowned. No, he drove again, this time taking different streets, left, right, straight. Another left. 10 minutes later, the diner appeared again, exactly where it had been. He gripped the steering wheel. "This isn't possible." Daniel pulled out his phone. Still no signal. He opened the offline map. The streets didn't match what he was seeing. Roads appeared where none should exist. Buildings had changed position. Even the courthouse had somehow moved closer to the church. Daniel stepped out of the SUV. He slowly turned in a circle. Everything looked normal. Yet nothing matched the map. almost as though the town had rearranged itself. A voice spoke behind him. "You'll only make it worse." Daniel spun around. An elderly man stood beside a mailbox. Daniel hadn't seen him approach. The man wore denim overalls and an old baseball cap. "My name is Samuel Hayes," the man said calmly. "I'm the county's mail carrier." Daniel blinked. "At midnight?" Samuel smiled sadly. "The mail only arrives after midnight." Daniel glanced at the leather mailbag hanging from Samuel's shoulder. The bag looked unusually heavy. "What kind of mail?" Samuel's smile disappeared. "The kind nobody wants." Without another word, Samuel handed Daniel a single envelope. It had no stamp, no return address, only Daniel's name written across the front. Daniel Mercer, his handwriting exactly his own. Daniel slowly opened it. Inside was one folded sheet of paper. It contained only one sentence. "You already tried to leave yesterday." Daniel stared. Yesterday? He had arrived less than 2 hours ago. He looked up. Samuel Hayes was gone. The street was empty again. Daniel rushed back into the diner. He placed the letter on the counter. "Molly." She looked at it once, then closed her eyes. It started. What started? Molly didn't answer. Walter quietly reached for the paper. After reading it, he sighed. "It remembers you." Daniel slammed his hand onto the counter. "What does that mean?" Walter looked exhausted. "The county doesn't forget anyone." Daniel shook his head. "I've never been here." Walter met his eyes. "That's what everyone says." A loud crash echoed from upstairs. Every customer froze. Daniel looked toward the ceiling. "What was that?" Molly whispered. "Nobody lives upstairs." Another crash. Footsteps, slow, heavy, crossing the floor above them. Daniel frowned. "If nobody lives there," Walter interrupted. "Nobody does." The footsteps stopped directly overhead. Then, knock, knock, knock. 3 slow knocks. Directly above Daniel. Daniel instinctively looked upward. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Another knock, then another. The lights flickered. The customers quietly stood from their seats, one by one. Without speaking, without looking at Daniel. They walked toward the exit. Molly hurried after them. Daniel grabbed her arm. "Where's everyone going?" Molly answered without looking back. "They're going home." "But why now?" "Because it knows where you are." Within seconds, the diner was empty. Only Daniel remained. The building suddenly felt much larger, much quieter. The overhead knocking continued. Knock, knock, knock. Daniel backed toward the front door. The knocking stopped. Silence. Then something began sliding across the ceiling. Not footsteps, not crawling, sliding, directly above him, following him. Daniel hurried outside. The cool night air hit his face. He looked back at the diner. Every light inside switched off, one after another. The last light remained above the second-floor window. Daniel slowly looked up. Someone was standing inside that window, watching him. It wasn't the smiling figure from before. It wasn't Molly. It wasn't Walter. It was a little girl. She couldn't have been older than 8. She gently raised one hand and wrote 4 words on the fogged glass with her finger. "You forgot me again." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He had never seen that little girl in his life. Yet somehow, the message made him feel guilty, as though somewhere deep inside his mind, he actually had forgotten her. Chapter 4. The House with His Name. Daniel Mercer couldn't take his eyes off the second-floor window. The little girl was gone. The fog on the glass remained. 4 words. "You forgot me again." A cold breeze swept through the empty street. Daniel blinked. The message slowly disappeared as the fog faded. It was as if it had never been written. Daniel stood alone in the middle of the road. The entire town was silent. Not a single light remained on. Even the moon seemed dimmer now. He pulled out his phone. Still no signal. The battery had dropped from 83% to 41%. He hadn't used it enough to explain that. A notification suddenly appeared. Low storage. Daniel frowned. He barely had 1,000 photos on the device. There should have been plenty of space. Curious, he opened the gallery. His heart skipped. Hundreds of photographs had appeared. He had never taken them. The first image showed the courthouse. The second showed the diner. The third showed the church. Every photograph looked old. Some were black and white. Some looked decades old. Daniel kept scrolling. There were thousands. Each one had been taken from different years, different seasons, different weather. Then he stopped. One photograph showed a family standing in front of a white farmhouse, a smiling man, a woman, a little girl, and beside them, Daniel. He stared in disbelief. He had never seen these people before, yet there he was, standing with them, his arm resting on the little girl's shoulder. On the back of the photograph, someone had written, Mercer family, October 14th, no year. Daniel's hands trembled. This isn't real. He zoomed in. Every detail was perfect. His face, his clothes, even the old leather watch he wore every day. The picture looked authentic. Impossible, but authentic. Another notification interrupted him. One new memory restored. Daniel frowned. Memory? Before he could think, a sudden image flashed through his mind. A little girl laughing, a white porch swing, someone calling his name. The memory lasted only a second. Then it vanished, leaving behind a strange feeling. Not fear, loss. A porch light suddenly turned on across the street. Daniel looked up. A small white farmhouse stood alone at the end of the block. He was certain it hadn't been there before. The front porch light flickered twice. The front door slowly opened. No one stepped outside. A voice came from within. Daniel. It was soft, gentle, almost comforting. The voice sounded familiar, painfully familiar. Daniel walked toward the house. Every step felt automatic, as though something inside him already knew the way. The mailbox came into view. He stopped. Written across it in faded black letters was a single name, Mercer. Daniel's mouth went dry. No. He stepped onto the porch. The wooden floor creaked beneath his feet. The front door stood wide open. Warm light spilled into the night. The house smelled like fresh coffee and cinnamon. For a moment, it smelled like home. Daniel? The voice called again. This time from the kitchen. He stepped inside. The living room looked lived in. Family photographs lined the walls. Books rested on shelves. A baseball glove sat beside an old armchair. Nothing about the place looked abandoned. It looked occupied, as though someone had left only minutes earlier. Daniel picked up a framed photograph. It showed the same family from the picture on his phone. The smiling man, the woman, the little girl, and Daniel. He slowly turned the frame over. Written in neat handwriting were the words, Our first autumn in Asher County. A floorboard creaked upstairs. Daniel froze. Someone was in the house. Hello? No answer. Only another creak. Slow footsteps crossed the second floor. Daniel should have left. Instead, he climbed the stairs. Each step groaned beneath his weight. The hallway at the top was lined with family photographs. Every one of them included Daniel. Camping trips, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, years of memories, years that had never happened. Or had they? A bedroom door stood slightly open. Daniel pushed it wider. The room belonged to a little girl. Toys covered the floor. Storybooks filled the shelves. A stuffed rabbit rested on the bed. On the wall hung dozens of drawings. One caught his attention. It showed the white farmhouse, the church, the courthouse, and a giant black shape standing over the entire town. Its arms stretched across every building. Its face had been scratched out with a black crayon. Beneath the drawing were 6 uneven words. "It takes the days we keep." Daniel stared at the sentence. What does that mean? A small voice answered behind him. "You promised you wouldn't forget." Daniel spun around. The little girl stood in the doorway. She looked exactly as she had in the diner window, about 8 years old. Brown hair tied into 2 braids. A faded yellow dress. She held the stuffed rabbit in her arms, her eyes filled with tears. "Who are you?" Daniel whispered. The girl looked confused. "You really don't remember?" Daniel shook his head. "No." The girl looked down at the floor. "My name is Emily." She paused. "I'm your daughter." Daniel felt the room tilt beneath him. "No." Emily nodded slowly. "You said this would happen." Daniel took a step backward. "I don't have a daughter." Emily looked hurt. "You did." Silence filled the room. Daniel couldn't breathe. Nothing made sense. Nothing. A loud knock echoed downstairs. 3 slow knocks. Emily's face instantly changed. She looked terrified. "It's here." Daniel frowned. "What is?" Emily grabbed his hand. "We have to hide." Another knock, this time louder. The entire house shook. Emily whispered urgently, "Don't answer the door." Daniel looked toward the hallway. "Who's outside?" Emily's voice trembled. "It isn't a person." The third knock rattled every window. Picture frames crashed to the floor. The lights flickered violently. Then, someone spoke from downstairs. The voice was calm, polite, friendly. "Daniel." A pause. "We know you're home." Daniel's blood ran cold. There wasn't just one voice. There were dozens, all speaking together, perfectly synchronized. "Daniel, open the door. We've been looking for you." Emily covered her ears. "Don't listen." Daniel stepped into the hallway. The voices continued. Then one voice rose above the others. It sounded exactly like his own. "We're your memories." Another pause. "And it's time to come back." Before Daniel could move, every family photograph hanging in the hallway changed at once. This time, Daniel was gone from every single one, as if he had never existed. Chapter 5. The People Who Remembered Him. Daniel Mercer stared at the photographs. Only seconds ago, every frame had shown him standing beside the same family. Now he was gone. The smiling man remained. The woman remained. Emily remained. But the space where Daniel had been was empty. It looked as if no one had ever stood there. He picked up one of the frames. There was no sign it had been altered. No torn edges, no blurred image. It was perfect, as though reality itself had quietly rewritten the past. Another knock echoed from downstairs. The entire farmhouse shook. Emily grabbed Daniel's wrist. "We have to go." Daniel looked toward the staircase. "Who is outside?" Emily whispered. "They aren't outside anymore." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" Emily slowly pointed toward the hallway behind him. "They're already inside." Daniel turned around. The hallway was empty. Then he heard it. Footsteps, not downstairs, not outside, above them. There shouldn't have been another floor. The farmhouse had only 2 stories. Yet someone was walking directly overhead. Slow, heavy, patient. Daniel looked up. Each step made the ceiling groan. Thump, thump, thump. Emily backed away until she was pressed against the wall. "They found us." Daniel lowered his voice. "Who found us?" Emily looked at him with frightened eyes. "The Rememberers." "The what?" "They collect people who forget." Daniel opened his mouth to ask another question. The footsteps stopped. Everything became silent. A long silence. Then a child laughed. Not inside the room. Inside the ceiling. Daniel felt his skin crawl. The laugh slowly moved across the ceiling, following them. Emily grabbed the stuffed rabbit tighter. "We have to leave before they come down." Daniel looked around. There isn't another exit. Emily pointed toward the bedroom closet. "There is now." Daniel frowned. The closet door had not been there before. He was certain of it. Yet now an old white door stood against the wall. Its brass handle slowly turned by itself. Click. The door opened a few inches. Darkness waited beyond it. Emily didn't hesitate. She stepped inside. Daniel followed. The moment he crossed the doorway, the farmhouse disappeared. He found himself standing in a narrow hallway. The walls were covered with hundreds of clocks. Every clock showed a different time. None of them ticked. The air smelled old, like dusty books and dried flowers. Daniel looked behind him. The closet door was gone. Only a blank wall remained. Emily sighed with relief. "They can't follow us here." Daniel looked around. "Where are we?" Emily answered softly. "The Hall of Lost Hours." The hallway stretched farther than Daniel could see. Clocks covered every wall. Large clocks, small clocks, broken clocks, pocket watches, grandfather clocks. Some hung upside down. Others had no hands at all. One clock slowly began moving backward. Another suddenly started ticking. Then another. Within seconds, the hallway filled with hundreds of different rhythms. Tick, 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 tick. None of them matched. The sound became almost hypnotic. Daniel covered his ears. "It won't stop." Emily nodded. "They're waking up." At the far end of the hallway stood an elderly man. He wore a gray suit that looked decades out of date. He held a lantern instead of a flashlight. His white beard reached the middle of his chest. The old man smiled kindly. "My name is Elias Ward." Daniel felt slightly relieved. Finally, someone who looked normal. Elias approached slowly. "You made it farther than most." Daniel frowned. "Do you know what's happening?" Elias nodded. "I've lived here well," he looked at the clocks. "I honestly don't remember." Daniel stared at him. "Where is this place?" Elias raised the lantern. "This is where forgotten hours come." Daniel blinked. "What does that mean?" Elias pointed toward one of the clocks. "Every time someone loses an hour." He pointed toward another. "Every time someone says, 'I don't know where the time went.'" Another clock. "Every missing moment arrives here." Daniel looked around the endless hallway. Thousands of clocks. Thousands of missing hours. The thought made his stomach turn. Emily tugged on Daniel's sleeve. "We shouldn't stay." Elias nodded. "She's right." Daniel looked at him. "Why?" Elias's smile disappeared. "Because once the clocks recognize you." A loud click echoed through the hallway. Every clock stopped. At exactly the same second. Silence. Complete silence. Elias slowly closed his eyes. "They recognized you." Without warning, every clock began chiming. Not ticking, chiming. Different tones, different speeds. Hundreds of bells filled the hallway. The walls vibrated, the floor trembled. Daniel covered his ears. Emily screamed. Elias shouted over the noise. "Run!" Daniel didn't ask why. He ran. Emily stayed beside him. Elias followed close behind. The hallway stretched endlessly ahead, but something was changing. Doors began appearing along the walls, one after another. Each door carried a date instead of a number. March 3rd, July 18th, December 9th, October 14th. No years, only dates. As Daniel passed one door, it slowly opened. He glanced inside. His breath caught. The room contained his childhood bedroom, exactly as he remembered it. The old wallpaper, his baseball trophies, his school backpack, even the comic books he had collected as a boy. A woman's voice drifted from inside. "Daniel?" His mother's voice. She had died 11 years earlier. "Come home." Daniel slowed. Emily immediately grabbed his arm. "Don't look. I heard my mom." "I know." Daniel stared at the open doorway. His mother appeared in the room, smiling warmly, just as he remembered her. She held out her arms. "It's okay, sweetheart." Daniel felt tears forming. For one impossible moment, he wanted to believe. Elias shouted from ahead, "She's not real." The woman smiled. "Of course I'm real." Daniel took one step toward the doorway. Emily pulled him back with surprising strength. "She only remembers what you miss." Daniel looked again. Something was wrong. His mother's smile never reached her eyes. She wasn't blinking. She hadn't moved. She was simply waiting, watching. Daniel stepped away. The doorway slammed shut. A loud scream erupted from inside the room. Not his mother's voice. Something much deeper. Something furious. The hallway suddenly began shaking. Cracks spread across the floor. Several clocks crashed from the walls. Glass shattered everywhere. Elias turned pale. "They're opening." Daniel looked at him. "Who's opening?" Elias pointed upward. The ceiling slowly split apart. A long black crack stretched across the hallway. It widened, wider, wider. Cold air poured through the opening. Then hands emerged. Dozens of pale hands, reaching down, searching, feeling through the darkness. Emily whispered through trembling lips, "They found the lost hours." One of the hands suddenly pointed directly at Daniel. At that exact moment, every clock in the hallway began displaying the same time, 11:07, and for the first time since entering Asher County, Daniel's own wristwatch started moving backward. Chapter 6. The Man Who Had Tomorrow's Memories. Daniel Mercer stared at his wristwatch. The second hand moved backward. Tick, tick, tick. Each backward movement made his head ache. He looked at the clocks covering the walls. Every one of them showed the same time. 11:07. Every clock, every watch, every pendulum, perfectly synchronized. Then, without warning, they all stopped again. The silence felt heavier than the noise had. The pale hands hanging through the cracked ceiling slowly withdrew into the darkness, one by one, until only the crack remained. Elias Ward lowered his lantern. "We don't have much time." Daniel looked at him. What were those things? Elias didn't answer immediately. Instead, he began walking deeper into the hallway. Emily followed without hesitation. Daniel hurried after them. Finally, Elias spoke. "They're looking for someone." Daniel frowned. "Who?" Elias glanced over his shoulder. "You." The hallway narrowed until it became a stone corridor. The clocks disappeared. The air became warmer. Daniel noticed something strange about the walls. Names had been carved into the stone, thousands of them. Some looked centuries old. Others appeared freshly carved. Every few feet another name appeared. Some were crossed out, others weren't. Daniel stopped walking. One name caught his attention. Daniel Mercer. Fresh, as if someone had carved it only moments ago. His fingertips brushed the letters. The stone felt warm, almost alive. Emily quietly spoke. "Don't touch your name." Daniel immediately pulled his hand away. "Why?" Emily looked frightened. "The county remembers everyone differently." Daniel frowned. "I still don't understand what this place is." Elias sighed. "You keep asking the wrong question." Daniel looked at him. "The right question is—" Elias paused. "What does this place want from you?" They entered a large underground chamber. Rows of wooden shelves stretched into darkness. Not books, not boxes, calendars. Thousands of them. Some looked brand new. Others were yellow with age. Every calendar displayed only one page. A single date. No year. Daniel slowly walked between the shelves. There had to be tens of thousands. Maybe more. Each one represented a different day. Or so it seemed. A soft voice echoed through the chamber. "You finally came." Daniel turned. A man stepped out from between the shelves. He looked about 50 years old. Gray hair. Clean-shaven. A neatly pressed brown jacket. He carried a notebook beneath one arm. "My name is Benjamin Cross." Daniel nodded cautiously. "You live here?" Benjamin smiled. "No. I remember here." Daniel frowned. "What does that mean?" Benjamin looked genuinely surprised. "You really don't remember anything." Benjamin opened his notebook. Every page was filled with handwritten notes. Dates, names, places. Daniel noticed something strange. The final pages were blank. Benjamin caught him looking. "Those pages haven't happened yet." Daniel blinked. "What?" Benjamin casually flipped to the final page. "I remember tomorrow." Silence. Daniel laughed nervously. "That's impossible." Benjamin nodded. "Outside this county." He looked around the chamber. "Not here." Benjamin studied Daniel's face. "You'll ask me 3 questions." Daniel frowned. "I haven't asked anything." Benjamin smiled. "You will." Daniel folded his arms. "Fine. What happens tomorrow?" Benjamin looked disappointed. "No." "That's not the first question." Daniel felt confused. Before he could speak, Benjamin answered anyway. "You won't see tomorrow." A chill spread through Daniel's body. Daniel forced himself to stay calm. "What is this place?" Benjamin smiled again. "There. That was your first question." Daniel stared. Benjamin pointed toward the shelves. "This county doesn't steal time." Daniel listened carefully. "It stores forgotten days." Daniel looked around. "These calendars—" Benjamin nodded. "Each one belongs to someone who forgot." Daniel frowned. "Forgot what?" Benjamin's smile slowly faded. "Their most important day." Emily quietly whispered, "I told you." Benjamin nodded. "The county survives because people forget." Daniel looked at him. "I've never forgotten anything important." Benjamin looked directly into his eyes. "Really?" Daniel opened his mouth. Nothing came out. For a brief moment, he couldn't remember his mother's face. He knew she existed. He knew he loved her, but her face, it was gone. Only for a second. Then it returned. Daniel staggered backward. Benjamin quietly closed his notebook. "It has started." A distant scream echoed somewhere beyond the shelves. Emily looked terrified. "They're here." Benjamin remained calm. "They're early." Daniel looked around. "Who's here?" Benjamin answered softly. "The collectors." The chamber suddenly grew cold. Every calendar page began turning by itself. Thousands of pages flipping together. The sound filled the room like a powerful wind. Flutter, flutter, flutter. Benjamin slowly closed his eyes. "They're searching today's memories." The pages stopped turning. Every calendar now displayed the same date, October 14th. Daniel's breathing became shallow. "The date changed." Benjamin nodded. It always comes back. Daniel frowned. Why? Benjamin looked toward the darkness. Because no one ever finishes October 14th. Heavy footsteps echoed between the shelves. Not one pair, several. Slow, perfectly synchronized. Emily grabbed Daniel's sleeve. We have to hide. Benjamin shook his head. It won't matter. Daniel looked at him. What are the collectors? Benjamin answered without emotion. They wear the faces you've forgotten. The footsteps grew louder, closer, closer, closer. Daniel peered between two shelves. At first, he saw only shadows. Then figures emerged. 5 people, dressed in dark gray coats. Their faces remained hidden beneath wide-brimmed hats. Each carried an old leather suitcase. None of them spoke. None of them looked around. Yet Daniel somehow knew. They already knew exactly where he was. One of the collectors slowly stopped walking. Without lifting its head, it spoke. Its voice sounded exactly like Daniel's father. Daniel. Daniel froze. His father had died 15 years ago. The collector spoke again. You promised you'd remember. Daniel couldn't breathe. The second collector lifted its head. Its face wasn't hidden anymore. It had no face at all. Only smooth skin where eyes, a nose, and a mouth should have been. Then another collector looked up. This one wore the face of Daniel's college roommate. The next wore the face of his first editor. Another wore the face of a woman he couldn't quite remember, no matter how hard he tried. Benjamin whispered, Don't let them make you remember. Daniel looked at him. Why? Benjamin's expression turned grave. Because the moment you remember everything, he paused. You'll remember why you came back to Asher County the first time. Before Daniel could ask what he meant, one of the collectors slowly opened its leather suitcase. Inside, instead of clothes or papers, was an ordinary family photo. The same photograph Daniel had found on his phone. Only this time, one more person stood in it. A smiling version of Daniel, 20 years older, holding Emily's hand and staring directly out of the photograph. Chapter 7. The Road That Returned Tomorrow. Daniel Mercer couldn't look away from the photograph inside the suitcase. The older version of himself smiled calmly. His hair was streaked with gray. His face carried deep lines. One arm rested protectively on Emily's shoulder. The other pointed directly toward Daniel. Then, the older Daniel blinked. Inside the photograph, Daniel stumbled backward. No. The collectors remained perfectly still. Only the photograph had moved. Benjamin Cross quietly closed the suitcase. Don't watch them too long. Daniel tore his eyes away. What was that? Benjamin answered in a low voice. They don't collect people. They collect choices. The chamber began to tremble. Dust drifted from the ceiling. One by one, the collectors closed their suitcases. None of them looked at Daniel. Instead, they all turned toward the same hallway, as if they had been called. The sound of distant tires echoed through the underground chamber. Daniel frowned. Tires? Emily looked frightened. It's starting early. Benjamin grabbed Daniel's arm. We have to leave, now. They hurried through a narrow stone passage. The farther they ran, the warmer the air became. After several minutes, the tunnel ended. Daniel stepped outside and froze. He was standing on the same highway where he had first entered Asher County. Rain fell in heavy sheets. Lightning flashed overhead. His SUV sat on the shoulder of the road, exactly where he had parked it. Daniel looked behind him. The tunnel was gone. Only a steep hillside remained. Daniel laughed with relief. We made it. Benjamin didn't smile. No. Daniel hurried to the driver's door. The keys were still inside. The engine started immediately. Headlights cut through the rain. Daniel looked at Emily. Get in. Emily didn't move. Benjamin quietly stepped away from the vehicle. Daniel frowned. What are you doing? Benjamin looked at the road ahead. Watch the mile markers. Daniel glanced toward the highway. The nearest sign read, Mile 17. He nodded. So? Benjamin answered softly. They should never count backward. Daniel pulled onto the highway. Rain hammered the windshield again. For the first time in hours, everything felt normal. Trees lined both sides of the road. Power lines followed the highway. Even the radio came back to life. A country song played quietly through the speakers. Daniel smiled. I knew there had to be a way out. Emily looked out the passenger window. She remained silent. 5 minutes passed. Daniel checked the next mile marker. Mile 16. He frowned. That's strange. Another 5 minutes. Mile 15. The road was climbing, not descending. He should have been leaving the county. Instead, the numbers kept getting smaller. Daniel pressed harder on the accelerator. The SUV surged forward. 70 miles per hour. 80, 90. Still, the mile markers continued. 14, 15, 16. Benjamin watched quietly from the back seat. Daniel glanced into the rear-view mirror. I thought you stayed behind. Benjamin looked surprised. I never left. Daniel's hands tightened around the steering wheel. He was certain Benjamin hadn't entered the SUV. Yet there he was, calmly sitting behind him. The rain suddenly stopped. Again, instantly. Daniel looked through the windshield. The highway ahead was dry. Behind them, the storm continued. Exactly as before. Emily whispered, It never lets anyone drive past tomorrow. Daniel looked at her. What does that mean? She didn't answer. Instead, she pointed ahead. Daniel's heart skipped. Another road sign appeared. Welcome to Asher County population, 2,841. Exactly the same sign, exactly the same place. Daniel slammed on the brakes. The SUV skidded across the pavement before stopping. He climbed out. No. He looked around wildly. This isn't possible. Everything was exactly as it had been the night before. Or perhaps earlier that night. The same trees, the same sign, the same cracked wooden fence. Daniel walked to the county sign. Someone had carved fresh words into the back of it. He brushed away the rainwater. The carving read, Second arrival. Daniel stared at the message. Second. Benjamin slowly approached. You've entered before. I haven't. Benjamin looked at him sadly. You don't remember. Daniel shook his head. I would have remembered this place. Benjamin didn't argue. Instead, he pointed toward the ditch beside the road. Would you? Daniel followed his finger. His breath caught. Half buried beneath weeds was another SUV, the same model, the same color, the same license plate. His SUV. Daniel slowly turned toward the vehicle he had just driven, then back toward the wreck. 2 identical vehicles. Both belonged to him. His legs felt weak. No. Benjamin remained silent. Daniel hurried toward the wrecked SUV. The driver's door hung open. Inside, a camera bag rested on the passenger seat. His camera bag, the memory cards, his notebook, everything, exactly as he had packed it before leaving home. Daniel opened the glove compartment. Registration papers, insurance documents, his name, Daniel Mercer. The registration date, October 14th, 2025. Exactly today. Emily stood beside him. She quietly said, This one didn't make it. Daniel looked at her. What do you mean? Emily pointed toward the driver's seat. Dark stains covered the fabric. Not blood. Mud. Thick black mud. It looked almost alive. The mud slowly moved across the seat, as though breathing. Daniel stepped back. The mud continued spreading. Then, words slowly formed across the dashboard, one letter at a time. Don't trust tomorrow. A loud horn echoed behind them. Daniel turned toward the highway. A school bus approached through the rain. Old, yellow. Its headlights glowed weakly. The bus slowed as it reached them, then stopped. The folding door hissed open. No driver stepped out. No children looked through the windows. The bus appeared completely empty. A handwritten sign rested behind the windshield. Last trip home. The interior lights flickered. Once, twice. Then every seat inside the bus became occupied. Dozens of passengers. None of them moved. None of them blinked. Every single one turned their head at the exact same moment. And every single face belonged to Daniel Mercer. Chapter 8. The County's First Rule. The old school bus sat motionless in the rain. Its engine idled with a deep, steady rumble. Daniel Mercer couldn't move. Every passenger inside had his face. Different ages, different hairstyles, different clothes, but every one of them was Daniel. Some looked frightened. Some looked exhausted. One appeared to be crying. Another smiled faintly, as though he had accepted something long ago. None of them blinked. Emily slowly stepped behind Daniel. Don't wave. Daniel kept staring. I wasn't planning to. Emily spoke even more quietly. And whatever happens, she swallowed. Don't get on the bus. Daniel looked at her. Why? Emily answered with a single sentence. Nobody gets off. The folding door creaked wider. A pair of polished black shoes appeared at the top step. Someone was getting off. Slowly, patiently. A man in a faded driver's uniform stepped onto the road. His cap hid most of his face. Rain passed straight through him, as though he wasn't completely solid. The driver stopped a few feet from Daniel. Without looking up, he spoke. Daniel Mercer. Daniel hesitated. Yes. The driver nodded once. I've been looking for you. Benjamin Cross immediately stepped forward. You can't have him. The driver slowly turned toward Benjamin. His expression never changed. He missed his stop. Benjamin replied, No. He refused it. The driver tilted his head. That isn't what my route says. Benjamin's voice became firm. Your route is wrong. For the first time, the driver smiled. No, my route is never wrong. The passengers inside the bus all raised one hand, perfectly synchronized. They pointed toward Daniel. Every one of them. Daniel felt his heart pounding. Who are they? The driver answered calmly. They're every version of you that chose differently. Daniel stared. I don't understand. You will. The driver reached into his pocket and removed an old paper ticket. He held it toward Daniel. One passenger, one destination, no return. Daniel didn't take the ticket. What happens if I get on? The driver looked toward the passengers. They remember. Daniel frowned. Remember what? The driver looked directly into Daniel's eyes. Everything. A long silence followed. Rain continued falling. The bus engine continued rumbling. Then Emily suddenly shouted, Run! Benjamin grabbed Daniel's arm. All three of them sprinted across the highway. The driver didn't chase them. He simply watched. The bus horn sounded once, a long, deep, mournful blast. Daniel glanced over his shoulder. Every passenger was now standing, still inside the bus, still staring at him. Then the bus slowly pulled away. Within seconds it disappeared into the rain. There was only one problem. There wasn't another road ahead. The bus had driven into empty woods and vanished. Nobody spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. What did he mean? Benjamin answered without slowing down. The bus only appears when someone reaches the end. The end of what? Benjamin looked at him. Their first life. Daniel frowned. My first life? Benjamin nodded. You've lived more than one. Daniel stopped walking. No. Benjamin sighed. I was hoping we'd have more time. Emily looked toward the dark tree line. They're coming. Daniel listened carefully. Branches snapped in the distance. Not one, many. Something large moved through the forest. Benjamin motioned toward an old gravel road. This way. The three hurried into the woods. The forest felt strangely quiet. No birds, no insects. Only the sound of leaves beneath their feet. Daniel noticed ribbons tied around several trees. White ribbons. Each one carried a handwritten name. He stopped beside the nearest one. Sarah Mitchell. Another tree. James Carter. Another. Linda Price. Hundreds of ribbons stretched through the forest. Every ribbon carried a different name. Emily whispered, "Don't touch them." Daniel looked around. "What are they?" Benjamin answered. "The people who escaped." Daniel looked relieved. "So there is a way out." Benjamin didn't smile. "No." Daniel's relief vanished. "What do you mean?" Benjamin looked at the ribbons. Their bodies escaped. A cold silence followed. Their names never did. The gravel road ended at a small wooden cabin. It looked abandoned. The windows were covered with blankets. A single lantern burned beside the front door. Benjamin knocked twice. Nothing happened. He knocked a third time. The door slowly opened. An elderly woman stood inside. She looked to be in her 70s. Silver hair, sharp blue eyes, a calm expression. "My name is Ruth Holloway," she said. "I've been expecting you." Daniel almost laughed. "Everyone keeps saying that?" Ruth nodded. "Because everyone remembers meeting you." The cabin smelled of burning cedar. Maps covered every wall. Not road maps, calendars. Hundreds of them. Every calendar had pieces cut away, entire weeks missing, entire months removed. Daniel walked closer. "Why are they cut apart?" Ruth answered. "Those days are gone." Daniel frowned. "Gone where?" Ruth slowly placed a kettle over the fire. "Into the county." Daniel sat at the wooden table. He was tired, confused, and running out of questions. Ruth poured 4 cups of tea. Then she looked directly at Daniel. "Before I explain anything," she paused, "I need you to answer one question." Daniel nodded. "Go ahead." Ruth asked quietly, "What is the earliest memory you have?" Daniel thought for several seconds. "My 8th birthday." Ruth slowly closed her eyes. Benjamin looked away. Emily lowered her head. Daniel frowned. "What?" Ruth opened her eyes again. "That's impossible." Daniel stared. "Why?" Ruth's voice barely rose above a whisper. "Because you were already living in Asher County before your 8th birthday." The room fell silent. Daniel laughed nervously. "No." Ruth nodded. "You weren't born here." She reached beneath the table, carefully placing an old leather journal in front of him. The cover carried only one name, Daniel Mercer. Daniel slowly opened it. His hands began shaking. The handwriting inside belonged to him. The very first entry read, October 14th. If you're reading this again, it means the county erased me before I could finish writing the truth. Daniel turned the page. Every remaining page had been torn out. Chapter 9. The Journal That Kept Changing. Daniel Mercer stared at the journal. Every page after the first had been ripped out. The torn edges were yellow with age. Whoever had removed them had done it carefully. Too carefully. Daniel looked up at Ruth Holloway. "Where did you find this?" Ruth folded her hands. "It wasn't found. It comes back." Daniel frowned. "What does that mean?" Ruth answered quietly. "Every few years someone discovers it exactly where you just did." Daniel looked down at the journal again. "And it's always mine?" Ruth nodded. "Always." Daniel ran his fingers across the first page. The ink looked fresh, as if it had been written earlier that day. He read the words again. "If you're reading this again, it means the county erased me before I could finish writing the truth." His heartbeat quickened. Again. That word bothered him more than anything else. Benjamin noticed. "You've read it before." Daniel immediately shook his head. No, Benjamin didn't argue. Instead, he quietly asked, "Then why did you turn directly to the first page without checking the cover?" Daniel froze. He hadn't even realized he'd done it. A strong gust of wind rattled the cabin windows. The lantern hanging from the ceiling began to sway. Emily looked toward the front door. "They're outside." Daniel listened. Nothing. Only the wind. Then, a soft knock. One gentle tap against the front door. Nobody moved. Another knock. Still gentle, still patient. Ruth whispered, "Don't answer." Daniel frowned. "Who is it?" Ruth answered, "It never tells us." The knocking continued. One knock every 30 seconds. Always the same. Never louder, never softer. Benjamin stood and quietly covered the windows with thicker blankets. The cabin became darker. Daniel couldn't understand why everyone looked terrified. "It's just someone at the door." Emily slowly shook her head. "No, it's waiting for someone to invite it in." Daniel laughed nervously. "That's just an old superstition." Ruth looked him straight in the eyes. "So were you." The knocking stopped. Complete silence followed. Daniel sighed with relief. Then, someone knocked from inside the cabin. 3 sharp knocks echoed beneath the floorboards. Knock, knock, knock. Daniel jumped to his feet. "What was that?" Nobody answered. Emily covered her ears. Benjamin quietly whispered, "It found another entrance." The floor beneath the dining table trembled. Wood creaked loudly. A thin crack slowly appeared between the floorboards. Cold air drifted upward. Daniel knelt beside the crack. There was light beneath the cabin. Not electric light. A pale blue glow. He leaned closer and saw another room directly below them. The room looked identical to the cabin. Same table, same chairs, same fireplace, except someone was sitting where Daniel was standing. Daniel himself. He stared in disbelief. The other Daniel slowly looked up. Their eyes met through the narrow crack. The other Daniel smiled, then calmly raised one finger to his lips, as if asking for silence. Before Daniel could react, the crack sealed itself. The floor became solid again, as though nothing had happened. Daniel slowly stood. "Did you see that?" Benjamin nodded. Ruth nodded. Emily refused to look at him. Daniel felt anger replacing fear. "Why does everyone act like this is normal?" Benjamin answered, "Because after enough time..." He paused. "It becomes normal." Daniel slammed the journal onto the table. "I want answers." Ruth sighed deeply. "You deserve them." She reached toward the fireplace. From inside the chimney, she removed an old metal box. Its surface was covered with scratches. Inside were dozens of photographs. Daniel picked up the first photograph. It showed the cabin. Snow covered the roof. Ruth stood outside. Benjamin stood beside her. Emily smiled at the camera. Daniel stood with them. He turned the picture over. Written neatly on the back were the words, "Winter 1998." Daniel frowned. I was 12. Benjamin nodded. Yes. I wasn't here. Benjamin looked genuinely confused. You were. Daniel picked up another photograph. Summer, the same cabin, the same people, only older. He turned it over. Summer 2007, another, spring 2016, another, autumn 2022. Every photograph included Daniel, every single one. Years he knew he had spent somewhere else, years he could clearly remember. College, his first newspaper job, his apartment in Nashville, his mother's funeral. He remembered all of it. Didn't he? A sudden pain shot through his head. Daniel grabbed the edge of the table. A memory surfaced. Just for a moment. He saw himself painting the cabin porch with Benjamin. Emily laughed nearby. Ruth handed him a paintbrush. The memory felt real, painfully real. Then another memory appeared, graduating from college. Both memories existed at the same time. Both felt equally true. Daniel gasped. I remember both. Benjamin quietly nodded. That's how it starts. The lantern suddenly went out. Darkness filled the cabin. Emily whispered, "They're inside." Nobody had opened the door. Nobody had broken a window. Yet someone was breathing in the room. Slow, deep, steady. Daniel couldn't see anything. Then the lantern reignited by itself. Everyone was exactly where they had been. Except there was now one extra chair at the table. Occupied. A man sat silently with them. No one had seen him enter. He looked to be around 60. Gray suit, black gloves, neatly combed white hair. His expression was calm, almost friendly. He smiled politely. "My apologies." He folded his hands on the table. "I should have introduced myself sooner." Daniel stared. "Who are you?" The man answered, "My name changes." He smiled a little wider. "But most people eventually call me." He paused. "The keeper." The room fell silent. The keeper looked directly at Daniel. Then he said the one sentence that made everyone's face lose color. "Daniel." He smiled warmly. "You've already failed this time." The keeper slowly slid a photograph across the table. It showed Daniel standing in front of the cabin. The date on the back read, "Tomorrow." Chapter 10. Tomorrow never happened. Daniel Mercer stared at the photograph. It had been taken in broad daylight. He stood outside Ruth Holloway's cabin. His clothes were dirty. His face looked older. Not by years, by exhaustion. Behind him, Ruth, Benjamin, and Emily were nowhere to be seen. He slowly turned the photograph over. Only 2 words were written on the back. October 15th. Daniel looked up. "But today is October 14th. The keeper smiled. Exactly. Nobody spoke. The silence inside the cabin felt almost unbearable. Daniel placed the photograph on the table. "You made this." The keeper gently shook his head. "I don't make photographs. I preserve them." Daniel folded his arms. "So this is fake?" The keeper looked disappointed. "No. It's simply earlier than your memory." Daniel frowned. "That's impossible." The keeper smiled again. "In your world." Benjamin stepped between Daniel and the keeper. "You've said enough." The keeper looked at Benjamin with quiet amusement. "I've barely begun." Ruth stood as well. "You are not welcome here." The keeper slowly removed one black glove. His hand looked completely ordinary. Except there were no fingerprints, only smooth skin. He rested that hand on the journal. Immediately, new words began appearing on the empty pages. Daniel watched in disbelief. Ink spread across the paper by itself. Sentence after sentence, line after line, as though someone invisible was writing. Daniel grabbed the journal. The writing stopped. He looked at the newest page. His breathing slowed. The handwriting was his. Every letter, every curve, every mistake. It read, "The keeper will ask me 3 questions." Daniel quickly turned the page. Another sentence appeared. "I must not answer honestly." Daniel looked at Benjamin. "Did you write this?" Benjamin slowly shook his head. "No." The next sentence appeared while Daniel watched. "He's reading this with us." Daniel's heart pounded. The keeper chuckled softly. "I do enjoy journals." He looked toward Daniel. "They're the only books that rewrite themselves." Daniel slowly closed the cover. "I don't believe any of this." The keeper nodded politely. "I know. You never do." Outside, a church bell rang. Everyone inside the cabin became still. Daniel counted. 1, 2, 3. The bell continued. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Daniel looked toward Ruth. 9 bells? Ruth whispered. "That has never happened before." The keeper quietly smiled. "It has. You simply don't remember." The cabin suddenly shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. A loud cracking sound echoed outside. Emily ran to the window. Her face turned pale. "The trees." Daniel hurried beside her. Every tree surrounding the cabin had changed. Their leaves were gone. Their branches were covered with calendars. Hundreds of them. Thousands. White pages fluttered in the wind. Each page displayed the same date. October 14th. No year, just the date. The entire forest had become a forest of calendars. Daniel opened the front door. Cold air rushed inside. Benjamin shouted, "Don't!" But Daniel had already stepped outside. The papers hanging from the trees rustled together. Not in the wind. In voices. Soft whispers surrounded him. Different voices, different ages, different accents, all saying the same sentence. "Don't forget today." Daniel slowly walked toward the nearest tree. He reached for one calendar page. The moment his fingers touched it, a memory exploded into his mind. He saw himself driving toward Asher County. Not yesterday. Years ago. He wasn't alone. Emily sat beside him. Only she wasn't 8 years old. She was about 25, laughing, talking, calling him Dad. The memory vanished. Daniel staggered backward. "No." Emily stood in the cabin doorway. She looked exactly 8 years old. Yet for one impossible second, Daniel had remembered her as an adult. The whispers stopped. Every calendar page became perfectly still. Daniel looked around. Someone else was standing among the trees. An old man, thin, wearing a dark coat. His back faced Daniel. The old man slowly turned. Daniel stopped breathing. It wasn't a stranger. It was him, much older, nearly 80, his hair completely white, his shoulders bent with age. The old Daniel smiled sadly. "I finally found you." Benjamin rushed outside. "Don't listen to him." The old Daniel ignored Benjamin. He looked only at Daniel. "You keep making the same mistake." Daniel took one cautious step forward. "What mistake?" The old man sighed. "You keep trying to escape." Daniel frowned. "Isn't that the point?" The old man slowly shook his head. "No." His eyes filled with regret. "The county isn't your prison." A long silence followed. Daniel waited. The old man finished the sentence. "It's your shelter." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. "My shelter?" The old man nodded. "If you leave." He looked toward the sky. "It finds you." Daniel's voice barely worked. "What finds me?" The old man slowly raised one trembling finger, pointing upward. Everyone looked. The sky was changing. The clouds weren't moving. They were opening, like enormous doors. Beyond them, there wasn't another sky. There was another town, upside down, hanging silently above Asher County. Its streets mirrored the ones below. Its houses matched perfectly, except Every building in the upside-down town was occupied. Thousands of people stood motionless, looking down, watching Asher County, watching Daniel. And every single one of them had no shadow. Then, for the first time since Daniel arrived, every person in the upside-down town smiled at exactly the same moment. Chapter 11. The Town Above the Sky. Daniel Mercer couldn't breathe. The town hanging above the clouds looked exactly like Asher County. Every road matched. Every house stood in the same place. Even Ruth's cabin existed above them, only upside down, as if another world had been built beneath the sky or above it. He wasn't sure anymore. The people standing there never looked away. Thousands of silent faces, all smiling, all watching him. A cold wind swept through the forest. The calendar pages hanging from the trees began fluttering again, not because of the wind, because the people above had started moving, slowly, together. Every person in the upside-down town took one step. The sound echoed across the valley. One step, thousands of footsteps, one heartbeat. Benjamin's face turned pale. "They've started counting." Daniel looked at him. "What does that mean?" Benjamin answered without taking his eyes off the sky. "It means they're getting closer." Daniel looked up again. The upside-down town hadn't moved, yet something felt different. The people looked larger, closer, almost as though the sky itself had lowered. Emily grabbed Daniel's hand. "We have to go." Daniel nodded. "Go where?" Emily whispered. "To the courthouse." Benjamin immediately turned. "No." Emily looked at him. "We don't have another choice." Benjamin closed his eyes. "I hope we'd never have to take him there." Ruth disappeared into the cabin for a moment. She returned carrying an old brass key. It was unusually long, nearly 8 inches. The metal looked worn smooth with age. She placed it in Daniel's hand. "It's yours." Daniel stared at the key. "I've never seen this before." Ruth smiled sadly. "You've carried it longer than anyone." Daniel examined the key. Strange symbols had been carved along its shaft. Not letters, not numbers. They looked almost like tiny calendar pages. As he turned it over, he noticed something engraved near the handle. "Return only on the last day." A chill ran through him. "What last day?" Nobody answered. A deep rumble echoed across the valley. The 4 of them looked up. The town above had changed again. People were no longer standing in the streets. Now they stood on the rooftops, still smiling, still watching. Daniel counted. 1, 2, 3. Every house had exactly one person standing on its roof. No more, no less. Emily whispered, "They're making room." Daniel looked at her. "For who?" Emily didn't answer. They hurried back toward town. The roads looked different now. Buildings leaned at impossible angles. Streetlights bent toward the ground like wilted flowers. Daniel frowned. Was it always like this? Benjamin shook his head. "No. The county changes whenever the sky opens." Daniel looked behind him. The forest they had just left was gone. In its place stood an empty cornfield, as though the cabin had never existed. Daniel stopped walking. "Where's Ruth?" Benjamin looked around. The older woman had vanished, without a sound, without a trace. Only footprints remained in the dirt. They ended abruptly in the middle of the road. The courthouse stood ahead. Its clock tower still showed 11:07. The hands had never moved. The town square was deserted. No parked cars, no people, no sounds. Even the wind had disappeared. Daniel reached for the courthouse door. It opened before he touched it, slowly, silently. Inside, the courthouse looked impossibly large. The lobby stretched much farther than it should have. Rows of wooden benches disappeared into darkness. Tall shelves filled with dusty files lined the walls. Daniel noticed every file carried a person's name. Benjamin quietly said, "Don't read yours." Daniel looked at him. "Why?" "Because once you know what's inside," Benjamin paused, "the county won't let you unknow it." Daniel followed Benjamin through the endless hallway. They passed hundreds of file cabinets, thousands of names. Some folders looked ancient, others appeared brand new. Then Daniel noticed something impossible. New folders were appearing, by themselves. Empty drawers slowly slid open. Fresh files quietly settled inside. Invisible hands stamped dates across the covers. October 14th. Every one of them. Emily suddenly stopped walking. "Someone's here." Benjamin listened. Footsteps echoed from somewhere ahead. Not hurried, not hidden, steady, confident. A man stepped into view. Daniel immediately recognized him. Samuel Hayes, the mail carrier. He still carried the heavy leather mailbag. Samuel smiled. "I've been looking for you." Daniel sighed. "So has everyone else." Samuel nodded. "They always do." Samuel reached into the mailbag. He removed a single envelope. No stamp, no address, only Daniel's name. Again. Daniel hesitated before taking it. "It's from you." Samuel's smile faded. "No, it's for you." Daniel carefully opened the envelope. Inside was another handwritten note. Only one sentence. "Stop looking for your first visit." Daniel frowned. He turned the paper over. Blank. When he looked back, Samuel had disappeared. The mailbag lay alone on the courthouse floor, still moving slightly, as though something inside it was alive. A soft cry came from inside the bag. Emily stepped backward. Benjamin slowly knelt. He opened the bag just enough to look inside. His face lost all color. Daniel swallowed. "What is it?" Benjamin closed the bag immediately. "You don't want to know." Daniel grabbed his arm. "Tell me." Benjamin looked at him with tired eyes. "There aren't letters inside." Daniel waited. Benjamin spoke so quietly, Daniel almost didn't hear him. "They're memories." The courthouse lights flickered once, then went out. Darkness swallowed the hallway. Only the clock tower above continued chiming. One slow bell, then another. Daniel counted instinctively. 1, 2, 3. He reached 11. The bells didn't stop. 12, 13, 14. Emily covered her ears. Benjamin whispered, "It's never rung this many before." The bells continued. 15, 16, 17. Then silence. A calm voice echoed through the courthouse. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Everyone heard it clearly. "Case number 14. A pause. Daniel Mercer. Another pause. "Your appeal has been denied." The courthouse doors slammed shut behind them. At the far end of the hallway, a courtroom door slowly opened by itself. Inside, every seat in the gallery was occupied. Every person sitting there was staring at Daniel. None of them had faces, but each held a calendar open to the same page. October 14th, and at the judge's bench sat the keeper, waiting for the trial to begin. Chapter 12. The Trial of the Forgotten Day. Daniel Mercer stood frozen in the courthouse hallway. The courtroom door remained open. No one inside spoke, no one moved. The faceless crowd simply waited, as though the trial could not begin until Daniel entered. Benjamin Cross stepped in front of him. "We leave." The keeper's voice drifted from the courtroom. "You already tried that." Benjamin ignored him. "Daniel, don't look at the judge." Daniel frowned. "Why?" "The moment you recognize him." Benjamin stopped himself. It will already be too late. The keeper calmly adjusted a stack of papers on the judge's bench. He wasn't wearing a robe, only the same gray suit, the same black gloves. He smiled politely. Court is now in session. No one answered. The faceless audience slowly turned toward Daniel. Every blank face somehow conveyed the same emotion: expectation. Daniel took one cautious step backward. The courtroom grew larger. He took another. The hallway became shorter. He blinked. The distance between himself and the courtroom had somehow disappeared. He was now standing at the entrance. Benjamin whispered, "It pulled you." Daniel swallowed. "How?" Benjamin quietly replied. "It doesn't move you. It moves the place around you." Emily tugged at Daniel's sleeve. "Don't cross the wooden line." Daniel looked down. A thin strip of dark wood separated the hallway from the courtroom floor. He hadn't noticed it before. The keeper smiled. "Very good. You still remember the first rule." Daniel looked up. "I've never been here." The keeper's smile widened. "You've said that every time." The audience slowly stood, not all at once, one after another, like falling dominoes. First the front row, then the second, then the third, until every faceless person was standing. No one made a sound, no footsteps, no rustling clothes. Only silence. The keeper looked toward Daniel. "The court recognizes the defendant." Daniel frowned. "Defendant?" The keeper nodded. "You stand accused." "Of what?" The keeper looked almost surprised. "You don't remember." The judge reached for a thick leather file. Daniel immediately noticed the name written across the front: Daniel Mercer. The file was enormous, thousands of pages. The keeper placed it on the bench. A cloud of dust filled the air. "You've been very busy." Daniel's voice shook. "I've never done anything." The keeper calmly opened the file. "You've forgotten." The first page contained a photograph. Daniel driving into Asher County. The second, Daniel leaving Asher County. The third, Daniel arriving again. The fourth, leaving again. Page after page. Arrival, departure, arrival, departure. The dates changed, the years changed, but the road remained the same. Daniel whispered, "No." Benjamin slowly lowered his head. The keeper looked at Daniel kindly. "You've escaped 112 times." The courtroom fell silent. Daniel's knees weakened. "That's impossible." The keeper gently turned another page. 112 attempts. 112 failures. Daniel's head began throbbing. Images flashed through his mind. Driving, running, hiding, waking, returning. The memories disappeared as quickly as they came. He grabbed the nearest bench to steady himself. Emily looked terrified. "They're giving them back." Benjamin looked toward the keeper. "You promised." The keeper replied calmly, "I promised nothing." The courtroom clock struck once. Every calendar held by the audience flipped to a new page. October 15th. Daniel looked around, but the date changed again. October 16th. Another page. October 17th. Faster. October 18th. October 19th. October 20th. Hundreds of calendars flipping together. The sound filled the room like heavy rain. Benjamin whispered, "They're spending his days." Daniel looked at him. "What does that mean?" Benjamin didn't answer. The calendars finally stopped. Everyone displayed a different date. Not one matched another. The keeper smiled with satisfaction. "There, your missing days." Daniel stared at the audience. Each faceless person now held one day, one piece of his life. Benjamin quietly said, "They divided your memories." The keeper slowly stood. For the first time, His shadow became visible. Daniel's stomach tightened. It wasn't shaped like a man. It stretched across the courtroom floor like the outline of an enormous tree. Thousands of thin branches spread beneath every bench. Each branch ended beneath someone's feet. Daniel stared. The shadow was alive. It slowly moved. Without the keeper moving at all, Emily suddenly gasped. "The branches!" Daniel followed her gaze. The shadow had reached him. One black branch touched the tip of his shoe. Instantly, he remembered something. A little girl laughing on a front porch. She called him Dad. Daniel closed his eyes. Emily, older, 25. The memory felt real, painfully real. He opened his eyes again. Emily was still 8 years old. Daniel whispered, "I remember." Emily's face filled with tears. "So do I." The keeper looked pleased. "Excellent. Now we're making progress." Benjamin stepped forward. "No." The keeper ignored him. He looked only at Daniel. "Tell me, what happened on October 14th? Daniel tried to answer. Nothing came. His head felt empty. The keeper smiled again. "Exactly." Without warning, every light inside the courtroom exploded. Glass rained from the ceiling. The courthouse shook violently. The faceless audience turned toward the windows. Outside, the upside-down town had descended. It no longer hung in the sky. It hovered directly above Asher County, only a few hundred feet overhead. Daniel could clearly see the people now. Every one of them had stepped to the edge of their roofs, looking down, waiting. Then, every person above raised one hand. At exactly the same moment, every faceless person inside the courtroom raised one hand in response, like reflections in a mirror. The keeper quietly closed Daniel's file. His smile disappeared for the first time. He looked almost concerned. Then he whispered something that made Benjamin's face turn completely white. There early, the entire courthouse began lifting off the ground, and through the shattered courtroom ceiling, Daniel watched the upside-down town slowly descend to meet the one below. Chapter 13. The Day That Never Ended. The courthouse groaned as it rose into the air. Daniel Mercer grabbed the edge of a wooden bench to keep from falling. Outside the shattered ceiling, the upside-down town continued descending. Slowly, silently. Its rooftops were now only a few hundred feet away. Benjamin Cross stared upward. His face had gone pale. "We're out of time." Daniel looked at him. "Out of time for what?" Benjamin didn't answer. He simply whispered, "They finally found October 14th. The entire courtroom tilted. Old law books slid from the shelves. Wooden benches crashed across the floor. The faceless audience remained perfectly still. Not one of them lost balance. Not one reached for support. They simply stood there, watching Daniel. The keeper calmly remained behind the judge's bench, as if nothing unusual was happening. The ceiling finally gave way. With a deafening crack, the roof split apart. Moonlight poured into the courtroom. Except, it wasn't moonlight. The light came from the town above. Every window in the upside-down town glowed with the same pale blue light. Daniel shielded his eyes. The light hurt. Not physically, emotionally. Every second he looked at it, another memory disappeared. His mother's laugh, gone. His first apartment, gone. The face of his college roommate, gone. Daniel gasped. "What is happening to me?" The keeper answered softly, "They're making room." Emily grabbed Daniel's hand. "We have to leave now." Daniel nodded. "Where?" Emily pointed toward the broken roof. "There." Daniel looked at her in disbelief. "The roof!" Benjamin stepped beside them. "It isn't a roof anymore." Daniel looked again. The hole above no longer showed the sky. Instead, it showed another street, a familiar street, the same courthouse, the same square, only upside down. Without warning, people began falling, not from the courthouse, from the upside-down town, one after another. Hundreds of silent figures dropped toward Asher County. Daniel instinctively stepped back. They never screamed, never flailed. They simply fell, until they stopped, halfway between the two towns, suspended in the air, floating motionless like raindrops frozen in time. Daniel stared at them. Every suspended figure looked ordinary. Men, women, children, old people, no monsters, no strange faces, just normal people. Then every one of them slowly opened their eyes, together, and looked directly at Daniel. Emily whispered, "They chose him." The keeper quietly closed his eyes. "I was afraid of this." Benjamin looked at him. "You knew?" The keeper nodded. "I always know." Daniel frowned. "What is happening?" The keeper opened his eyes again. "For the first time." He paused. "Both towns remember the same person." A deep vibration spread through the courthouse. The floor beneath Daniel cracked open. Not a small crack. A huge one, straight through the middle of the courtroom. Daniel nearly lost his balance. He looked down. There was no foundation beneath the courthouse anymore. Only darkness, endless darkness, far below. Thousands of calendar pages drifted through the void like falling snow. One page floated upward. Daniel caught it without thinking. The page displayed only one date, October 14th. No year. As he held it, another memory returned, powerful, clear. He saw himself standing in Asher County years earlier. Emily wasn't a child. She was an adult. Benjamin looked younger. Ruth smiled proudly. They were celebrating something. Someone handed Daniel a birthday cake. Candles flickered. Then, the memory shattered. Everything became black. A bell rang. People screamed. Emily cried. Daniel heard his own voice shouting one sentence. "I'll come back." Then the memory disappeared. Daniel dropped to one knee. "I've been here before." Benjamin slowly nodded. "Yes." Daniel looked at Emily. "I know you." Tears rolled down Emily's face. "You used to?" Daniel's chest tightened. "I promised I'd come back." Emily whispered, "You always do." The floating people between the two towns suddenly smiled. Not friendly smiles, relieved smiles, as though they had been waiting for Daniel to remember. The keeper stepped away from the judge's bench. For the first time since Daniel had met him, he looked frightened. "They're waking." Benjamin looked toward the suspended crowd. "No," the keeper answered quietly. "Yes." The people hanging in the air slowly began speaking, not individually, together. Thousands of voices merging into one. The sound echoed across both towns. "Daniel!" The voice wasn't threatening. It wasn't angry. It sounded almost hopeful. "We've been waiting." Daniel looked upward. "What do you want?" The answer came immediately. "Our tomorrow." The courthouse shook again. Benjamin grabbed Daniel's shoulders. "Listen to me." Daniel nodded. Benjamin spoke as quickly as he could. "There is only one way this ends." Daniel waited. Benjamin's voice broke. "You have to remember October 14th. Daniel frowned. "I've been trying." Benjamin slowly shook his head. "No, you've been avoiding it." The keeper quietly opened Daniel's file one last time. Every page inside had gone blank. Only one remained. The final page. He slowly turned it around. Daniel stared at the single handwritten sentence. It was written in his own handwriting. "I erased my own memory because remembering would bring them back." Daniel felt the world spin. His breathing became shallow. What did I bring back? The keeper looked directly into his eyes. Before he could answer, the floating people between the two towns all raised one hand toward Daniel. Every calendar in Asher County suddenly burst into flames, and from somewhere beyond the burning pages, a child laughed. It wasn't Emily. It wasn't anyone Daniel recognized, but somehow, he knew that laugh had ended the world once before. Chapter 14. The Last Memory. The laughter echoed across Asher County. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The sound carried through every street, every empty house, every shattered window. Daniel Mercer felt it inside his chest. Not as fear, as recognition. He knew that laugh. He just couldn't remember why. Every burning calendar drifted upward. Instead of turning to ash, the pages floated into the sky. Hundreds became thousands. Thousands became millions. The entire county disappeared beneath a storm of burning paper. Each page carried the same date, October 14th. No year, only the day. Benjamin Cross whispered, "It's happening again." Daniel looked at him. "What is?" Benjamin closed his eyes. "The day is trying to finish itself." The keeper stood perfectly still. For the first time, he looked defeated. He removed both black gloves and placed them on the judge's bench. His hands were completely smooth. No fingerprints, no scars, nothing that made him unique. He looked at Daniel with tired eyes. "I've kept this place together for longer than I can remember." Daniel frowned. "What are you?" The keeper smiled faintly. "I was the first one who forgot." A powerful shockwave rolled through the courthouse. The walls cracked from floor to ceiling. Outside, the upside-down town finally touched Asher County. Not with an explosion, with silence. Every building merged perfectly with its reflection, house into house, road into road, tree into tree, two realities becoming one. For a brief moment, everything became perfectly still. Then the people arrived. The smiling people from the upside-down town stepped onto the streets. They walked among the empty buildings without making a sound. None of them cast shadows. None of them blinked. They simply wandered through the town, looking into windows, opening doors, reading forgotten mail, as if returning to homes they had left long ago. Daniel watched one woman kneel beside an abandoned bicycle. She smiled sadly. I finally remembered. Then she disappeared, like mist in sunlight. Emily squeezed Daniel's hand. "Look!" Daniel followed her gaze. The smiling people were vanishing, one by one. Each disappeared only after recognizing something. A house, a tree, a toy, a photograph. Benjamin quietly whispered, "They were never trapped." Daniel looked at him. They were lost. The child's laughter echoed again, closer this time. Daniel turned toward the courthouse stairs. A little boy stood there, about 6 years old, barefoot, wearing blue overalls. Daniel had never seen him before, yet tears filled his eyes immediately. The boy smiled. "You remembered everyone else." Daniel couldn't speak. The boy tilted his head, but not me. Daniel took one slow step forward. "Who are you?" The boy laughed softly. "You gave me my name." Daniel's heart pounded. "I don't." The words caught in his throat. Without warning, the final memory returned. Years ago, Daniel had entered Asher County as a journalist, just as he remembered. But he hadn't come alone. A young family had been driving in the car ahead of him. Rain covered the highway. Visibility was almost zero. The family lost control. Their car rolled into a ditch. Daniel had stopped to help. Inside the wreck was a little boy, barely breathing. Daniel held the child until help arrived. The boy smiled weakly, then asked one question. "What day is it?" Daniel answered. "October 14th. The child whispered, "I don't want today to end." Then he died. Daniel gasped. The courthouse disappeared. The town disappeared. Everything dissolved into darkness. Only the little boy remained, standing in front of him, smiling. Daniel whispered, "I'm sorry." The boy nodded. "I know." Daniel fell to his knees. "I tried to save you." The boy looked toward the empty darkness. "You did." Daniel looked confused. "Then why?" The boy gently interrupted him. "You couldn't save yourself." Another memory surfaced. The accident. Daniel remembered now. After helping the family, he had driven away, distracted, heartbroken. Only a few miles later, his own SUV had crashed. He hadn't died, but he had never truly left October 14th. Every version of Asher County, every impossible road, every forgotten day had grown from that single moment, a mind unable to let one day end. Daniel looked around. The darkness slowly faded. The courthouse returned. Benjamin, Emily, the keeper, they were all watching him. Daniel spoke quietly. "I remember." The keeper closed his eyes. "So it finally ends." Benjamin smiled through tears. "It's over." Emily hugged Daniel. For the first time, she felt real, warm, alive. Daniel hugged her back. "I'm sorry." Emily whispered, "You always are." The sky above Asher County began breaking apart. Not violently, gently, like thin ice melting beneath sunlight. Buildings became transparent. Roads faded. The burning calendar pages dissolved into light. The smiling people disappeared peacefully, one after another. The keeper slowly removed the judge's nameplate. He looked at Daniel one final time. There was never a trial. Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" The keeper smiled. "There was only one question." He paused. "Could you forgive yourself?" The courthouse vanished. The town vanished. Everything became brilliantly white. Daniel closed his eyes and felt himself falling toward the sound of his alarm clock. Chapter 15. October 15th. Daniel Mercer opened his eyes. Darkness, his bedroom ceiling, the soft hum of an air conditioner, a digital alarm clock beside his bed. 6:32 a.m. For several seconds he didn't move. His breathing was shallow. His heart pounded against his ribs. Then the alarm began ringing. Daniel reached over and shut it off. Silence filled the apartment. He sat on the edge of the bed and rubbed his face. A dream. His voice sounded weak. Just a dream. He laughed quietly. A nervous laugh. The kind people use when trying to convince themselves that everything is okay. He stood up, walked to the bathroom, splashed cold water on his face. When he looked into the mirror, his reflection looked perfectly normal. No strange smile, no impossible shadow. Just Daniel. Tired, sleep-deprived, alive. He walked into the kitchen and started a pot of coffee. The familiar routine helped calm his nerves. Outside, the morning sun filled the apartment with warm light. Cars moved through the streets below. A neighbor walked a golden retriever. Someone across the hall argued with a delivery driver. Normal sounds, normal people, normal life. Daniel smiled. "I needed this." His phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. A message from his editor. "Editor. Morning, Daniel. You still planning to drive into Western Kentucky today?" Daniel stared at the screen. Today. He hadn't gone anywhere. The entire story, everything, had happened before the trip. He slowly typed a reply. "Daniel, I don't think I'm going." A few seconds later, another message arrived. "Editor, that's not like you. You were excited about writing that story. Daniel deleted his first reply, then turned the phone face down. He wasn't driving anywhere today. Not after that dream. The coffee finished brewing. Daniel poured himself a mug. As he reached for the sugar bowl, something caught his attention. A thin layer of black mud covered the bottom of his hiking boots, the same boots he had left beside the apartment door the night before. He frowned. No. He picked one up. The mud was still wet. Daniel hadn't gone outside. He was certain of it. Slowly, he wiped a finger across the sole. The mud smelled exactly like wet earth after rain. Trying to ignore it, Daniel carried his coffee into the living room. His camera bag sat beside the couch. He hadn't touched it since returning from his last assignment. Or so he thought. The zipper was open. Daniel was sure he had closed it. He set down the coffee and looked inside. Everything appeared normal. Camera, lenses, memory cards, notebook. Then he noticed one extra item. A small brass key, about 8 inches long. Its surface was covered with tiny symbols. Daniel stared at it. His hands began shaking. He had never seen the key before, yet somehow it felt familiar. He carried the key to the kitchen table. As the morning sunlight struck the metal, he noticed an engraving near the handle. The words were unmistakable. Return only on the last day. Daniel's mouth went dry. It was the same key Ruth Holloway had given him, the same engraving, the same worn brass. His pulse quickened. No. He backed away from the table. I dreamed that, didn't he? Trying to prove it to himself, Daniel turned on his laptop. He opened a web browser. In the search bar, he typed, Asher County, Kentucky. He pressed enter. The search loaded. No results. He exhaled. See? It wasn't real. Then, a suggested search appeared beneath the empty results. Did you mean Asher County Historical Survey? Daniel frowned. He clicked it. The page opened. Blank. Only one sentence appeared in the center of the screen. This record has been archived. A second sentence slowly appeared beneath it. Access denied. Then the page disappeared by itself, returning him to the search screen. Daniel immediately shut the laptop. The apartment suddenly felt much colder. He looked toward the window. Outside, a city bus stopped at the corner. Perfectly ordinary. People climbed aboard. The doors closed. The bus pulled away. Daniel sighed with relief. Then he froze. Written across the back of the bus, in faded white letters, were 4 simple words. Last trip home. The bus turned the corner and disappeared. Daniel grabbed his coat. He needed fresh air. He hurried downstairs and stepped onto the sidewalk. The city was alive. Morning traffic, cyclists, street vendors, construction workers. Everything looked completely normal. He laughed at himself. I've lost it. Then a little girl walked past holding her mother's hand. She couldn't have been older than 8. As she passed Daniel, she looked up, smiled politely, and said, Good morning, Dad. Her mother immediately looked confused. The woman gently pulled the child closer. I'm sorry, she said. I don't know why she said that. Daniel forced a smile. It's okay. The mother and daughter continued walking. The little girl never looked back. Daniel stood perfectly still. His heartbeat echoed in his ears. He told himself it was a coincidence. Children said strange things all the time. That had to be all it was. He turned to go back inside. Something caught his eye. A calendar hanging in the lobby of his apartment building. Today's date had already been circled. October 15th. Nothing unusual. Except someone had written a note beneath the date, in neat black handwriting. Don't forget today. Daniel slowly reached toward the calendar. His fingers trembled. The handwriting looked familiar, painfully familiar. It was his own. The lights inside the lobby flickered once. Daniel looked toward the glass entrance doors. For just a heartbeat, he saw a reflection that wasn't his own. An older man, gray hair, tired eyes, standing exactly where Daniel stood. The older man smiled sadly, then raised one finger, pointing behind Daniel. The reflection disappeared. Daniel slowly turned around. No one was there, only the calendar, the circled date, and beneath it, a second sentence had appeared, one Daniel knew he had not seen before. See you again on October 14th.